Ocean Software was a name that you couldn't escape in the 8 and 16-bit era, one of the largest game developers and publishers on the scene, from landing in 1983 through to the mid-90s, when they vanished and were gobbled up by French games company Infogrames. The business was set up and run by David Ward and John Woods, but the product, the video games, were produced by a team which included today's guest, games developer Paul Owens. Welcome, Paul.
Hi.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for joining us. If we were to dig way back before Ocean started in 1983, there was another company called Spectrum Games where you worked. Just explain to us, Paul, where Spectrum Games fits into the Ocean story, if you will.
Well, Dave Ward was actually running a company to supply props to film companies like Granada, and I was doing a degree in polymer chemistry at Manchester, and in the halls I wanted some money, so I answered an advert. I'd been playing around with computers for a while. I had a ZX80, a ZX81, and I just bought a Spectrum, and I answered the advert, went in, and David said, right, well, we're thinking of getting into this gaming kind of thing, but we've not got any games yet, but we've got some adverts, and we're about to run some, so can you write some games? So I had a version of Road Frog, Hopper, whatever you want to call it, on the ZX81. And I asked him if he wanted to see that. He said, no, not really. He said, I'm interested in Spectrum. We want colour. So, well, I can write you one. I'm off for a few weeks, no uni for a while. So, and the next day, I started writing games. And we'd had a few in from the games that had been sent in by other people. And we released them as Spectrum Games. We had them, in fact, I've got, if you just bear with me.
Yeah, please show us anything that you've got.
So, yeah.
Oh, nicely framed. So we've got Road Frog, Caterpillar, Monster Muncher. I can't see what the top right one is. What's the other one?
That's the Robotron Frenzy.
You slipped there. Yeah. That's really...
Well, close. I mean, we called them whatever we called them, really. But so those came in, and they were just sort of samples, and I took those, and I've never really been any good at graphics, but I did the loader screen and in Melbourne Draw, and we had them sent off and started to sell a few through the newspapers.
Yeah, so you were having games sent in, but in-house, were you the sole developer at this point?
I was originally, yeah. Yeah, there was just me, and then we had a few guys join us. But I think by that time we were probably talking about being Ocean. So the only games really released on the Spectrum Games were my Road Frog, my version of Road Frog, and those that were sent in, the ones that you've just seen.
Yeah.
But there is one missing, but I can't remember which one it is.
Okay. Well, I remember. I seem to understand that David Ward of Spectrum Games and later the co-founder of Ocean wasn't entirely convinced that arcade games weren't just a passing fad. Did you share that same sentiment with him?
I didn't have a view, to be honest with you. I was just making money during uni. I never actually went back to uni. I stayed with David, so obviously it worked.
Yeah.
He thought it may be just a flash in the pan. But I think my view at the time was actually no. I mean, it's the computers are here to stay. And whatever we use them for, whether it be business or gaming or other really control systems, I think was because of my father's background's in motor racing and engineering. So I could see possibilities there. They were here to stay. There were things that you could do with computers that you couldn't do with anything else, and that included in the gaming world. Mm. And
do you think David's attitude that it might be a bubble that's going to burst at any time might have led to tight time schedules to just get these games and made before the perceived bubble bursts, or not?
I think that's one thing, but I think more it's a commercial operation like any other. I mean, speak to others about we did have a laugh writing games in the early days. We did the early days of Ocean when more programmers came along. But the key issue was that you needed to get product out there because you had advertising schedules, you had Christmases to meet. The more you could get out there, the more you could sell. I mean, Yeah,
And
let's not talk about quality yet. But
well, I did read a story in the Ocean book, which I've got here, involving a hammer and 50,000 tapes.
right, yeah. So rushing to get out for Jonathan Smith, despite what popular press might say, he was a good friend of mine. Used to call me Buggy Owens, and he was quite right. I mean, I did used to leave a few bugs in. And Kong was originally scheduled for release under the Spectrum Games banner, and John had quite a few produced, and they were outside the docks in the Raleigh building, which was just on the side of the canal in the centre of Manchester there. And I'd found a bug right at the last minute, which meant you couldn't get the third screen, and John gave me a hammer and a stiff talking to, and I had to smash these things up. I wish I'd have kept a few, actually, because they're probably worth a few quid now.
Yeah, they'd be like the ET of the Spectrum world. So you found your footing in coding, your skills are developing, and you've proven yourself a valuable developer to David there. How do we then make the leap from Spectrum Games to Ocean? Was it an entirely new company, a rebranding? How did this happen?
It was doing better than I think David expected. I mean, you'd have to ask David this, and memory's gone. It's a while back now. It's 1982, 83, but things were going better than expected, and work was ramping up, sales were ramping up, and David had an old friend in John, who was a partner, and had obviously discussed it. John was keen to get involved. He came down, and one of the things that I think they recognised with respect to differentiation of the product, Spectrum Games wasn't a wonderful title. So there was various discussions about what the new title would be of the company. They were going to change it because it wasn't just Spectrums. It was they didn't want to limit themselves to a single platform. There was Amstrad, there was the BBC, there was all sorts coming along at the time. So a new name was announced, and I think John was the one that made the final decision. I'm sure David agreed to it, but I wasn't party to that conversation. Somewhere in a hotel having a drink somewhere, if I remember rightly. It was finally decided on, and John spoke to me the morning after with a big hangover. So I said, right, we're going to change the name. It's Ocean, and
Ocean was born. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't. Was it Ocean, really?
Well, before long, you were working on a very well-known game. I don't know if this was your first. Correct me if it wasn't. Was Daley Thompson the first title that you worked on?
No, so I did Road Frog, Spectrum Games.
Right.
I did Kong, also Spectrum Games, but actually only released under the Ocean title. So, if the early Kong, there's one on the shelf behind me there. The early Kong cassettes still had the Spectrum Games colouring and things like that in there. And then the next one after that was Daley Thompson's.
Right, okay. And how did Daley Thompson's, how did the game idea, how was that conceived? Were you involved in that part, or were you just a programmer at a desk who gets handed
No. I get involved in all sorts of things, really. So, I mean, David or John, it varied depending on what the task was, would speak to me. Dave Collier was an early programmer with us as well. He was primarily on the Commodore side. So I headed up the Z80 based systems, and David kind of headed up the 6502 processor based systems. David used to work for a arcade games manufacturer in Wigan, and we used to go down to Wigan and have a look and see what the new games were on the arcades themselves. So we'd seen Track and Field. David had a view that, if we have game ideas, and we were always thinking of them, what can we do? Then we can try and tie them to something. And because it's really, he had a great deal of faith in the publicity of the PR of attaching it to something well known, whether that be films in later times, or Daley Thompson's in the early case. So we took the concept of Track and Field, not the Track and Field game as such, and adapted it for Daley. And but that was a discussion. Can we do it? What kind of things are we going to do? How long have we got to write it? can we get Daley Thompson involved? There was all sorts of issues about Daley not being able to earn money because the Olympics was an amateur situation there. Daley came down one day and had a look at, by the way, while it was in development.
Oh, you got to meet him. Okay.
Yeah. He asked about the colour of the character.
Okay.
And I went through all of the Spectrum's possible options, and he ended up, okay, white it is. Nice guy, actually, really nice guy.
Good. Well, for those who perhaps don't know, Daley Thompson was a very popular decathlete in the 80s, and he would have been at the Los Angeles Olympics in 84, which was the year of the game's release. A British icon, I'd say, at the time. Was the game ever rebranded elsewhere with a different athlete, or were you solely a UK operation at this time?
No, it was early days. So the American side of the operation, Ocean of America, wasn't really off the ground at that time, and also the Spectrum wasn't available. But it didn't seem to make any difference. I mean, I have a place in Bulgaria and occasionally speak to some Russians, and Russians of my age or slightly younger remember the game fondly. Didn't care that it was Daley Thompson or whoever. They just liked the game, which is good because, if you actually like playing the game rather than owning it, then that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, and just take a moment if you're watching and you played Daley Thompson. This is the man who cost you a fortune in broken joysticks.
Yeah,
this is the face.
It wasn't designed for joysticks. It was designed for rubber keys. My little badge here. I got my. You got
your little badge there. Oh, your Spectrum badge. Yeah.
Rubber keys. Yeah. I've got my original development Spectrums up on the shelf here.
Yeah, and I think I read in the book that it's actually faster. You'll get better times if you use the keys instead of a joystick. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, all the testing we did. So the Kempson joystick came along probably, it was there at the beginning, but we didn't develop the joysticks primarily. And I think it was David wanted, we've got to do it with the Kempson. So I had to detect whether he had a joystick in there. And the way there are a couple of ways of doing that, but it took a while to suss it out. So we slow you down if you've got a joystick plugged in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
As simple as that. You are slowed down.
Yeah, because the period of time that you can switch one to the other on a keyboard is less than you could do in physically with a joystick. So we wanted to make it very similar to a joystick. But we didn't envisage the fact that joysticks would be used so much, and it's quite funny watching the kids playing at the shows, I remember. And yeah, we went through a few as well, and they said, no, you have to use the keys.
Yeah.
That's what it was for.
Well, if I ever find myself in a tournament situation, then I'll opt for the keyboard.
Rubber keys. Yeah.
So we hear a lot of stories about the bedroom coders in the UK in this era, but it sounds like you were in an altogether more organised operation. Did you have a sense that you were more serious about the industry than others that you were competing with?
No.
Was it just a gigantic bedroom full of DOSing coders?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, a lot of work actually went on in the bedroom. We didn't, the offices were open from 9 till whenever we closed. But yeah, I'd take the work home and carry on working. If we were close to a deadline, sometimes it'd be 3 days solid. Because we promised that we'd get the masters out. The biggest bugbear was trying to get the previews out to the press and the magazines, because you had to have something working, and that was always a killer. That, yeah. So we worked at home.
And did design documents come into this part of the process, or at this point were the games largely locked away in the coder's head?
No, not till later, not till we started doing the Nintendo stuff. We had discussions and meetings about design forms, but not documents. We had when we started getting graphic artists, we had storyboards as well, but they were very loose, really loose. So no, we were just hacking them, as we say now.
Yeah. Well, there's another story that came out in the book that I was reading today, which was told by David Selwood. Along the way, Ocean acquired the rights to the bankrupt publishers Imagine, who were a company famous for buying Ferraris until the money ran out. But according to David, Ocean didn't afford you a Ferrari, but you did get to drive the boss's Porsche once. Is that right?
Yeah, so I had an XR3, but I used to get a salary. But, before we started running a proper company, if you like, I had royalties on the Kong, I think it was. So uh, I got some royalty money, and I ended up with a car of my own. But no, we didn't do. It was really for the press that. But Paul, our sales guy, had a Porsche 944, and we were late for to go into Ablex in Birmingham one day to master, and I can't remember what game it was now. Yeah, so Paul, I've got a motor racing history with my family, and I've always been in fast cars, and I've done a little bit of motor racing as well. So he let me drive, and it was a mistake, and I frightened the hell out of him. And he was really quiet, and I didn't realise why until we actually got to Aplex. He was quiet as a sheep. He was tripping it on. Never again, never. Yeah, and I had to go down on my own after that.
Excellent.
Punchback 2 it was, yeah.
Nice. Well, I recently spoke to coder Jim Bagley, and he explained how he quite happily coded thousands of lines of assembler at his desk with a rubber-keyed ZX Spectrum. And I know at one point you were tasked with streamlining the creation process by coming up with a development environment. I don't know if you were tasked with it or if you took it upon yourself to try and streamline things.
Yeah, a bit of both.
So what did that comprise of then, this new dev environment for the Spectrum?
Well, the first problem is we were going through 3 or 4 Spectrums every month. The rubber keys just didn't last for you typing on them. And we tried different keyboards and plugging them in. The trouble is the interfaces always went wrong after a month. So we were doing the same thing. So we had a look around for different systems, and there was a PATRON Einstein Z80-based system. Based on operating system CPM, the Forerunner to all. You've still got CPM stuff in your Windows 10 now, and Linux. So we found this, and it had proper discs in it that you could drop in a cup of tea and still kind of work.
Yeah, big old industrial-looking unit with a nice chunky keyboard, isn't it? Yeah,
and a decent screen, and it also allowed you to separate your development environment from your target environment, whatever that be, Amstrad and port across code, because a lot of the code is actually quite similar on the Amstrad than it would be on a Spectrum. So, but we didn't have a decent assembler for it, so I wrote an assembler for it, and it kind of got adopted. The thing was, I'd been down to Sinclair's, and they were writing stuff on VAX mainframes.
Oh wow! Okay.
So, yeah, and we were looking. I was looking at these VAX mainframes and just thinking, different world. So we ended up. We tried Amigas later on, and we tried a few other machines, but the Amstrad seemed to work. The PATRON Einstein seemed to work well, so we stuck with them, and it was just we got more and more tools as the day went on. If we found that we needed something, so we kind of invented a little bit of a language in some areas as well. So you'd only have to type a couple of keystrokes, and you'd end up with a routine that would put a sprite on a screen, for example, or something like that. Not many people use that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So with that new system in place, you must have been ready to kick out a flurry of new titles. What did you create? What came for you after Daley Thompson? What were your next titles?
Well, I was involved with Hunchback as well. We had a guy join us from school. Christian, that's it, Christian Urquhart. Yeah. So Christian, we went down to see him, and he just really did the menu systems and one of the screens, I think, for dailies. And he was supposed to be writing Hunchback, and it was struggling a little bit with that. So I wrote most of that. Christian might remember different, but I've still got the source code here. So then we did, I think, Cavalon. Don't remember a lot of that. And to be honest, I've forgotten half the games. Mark Jones used to be my graphic artist later on, reminded me of a few that I'd completely forgotten about.
Yeah, well, you must have had the follow-up to Daley Thompson. Were you involved in Super Test? Yeah.
Yeah. And then we did Hunchback 2.
I've only got the Commodore 64 version here. I think, would you have worked on that one? You would have worked on the Spectrum version.
I mean, David, I think David was involved. That might have been Bill, actually. Bill, I can't remember if it was Bill Barner or David, that one. But we didn't, we were just throwing them out. We didn't bother putting our name. I didn't bother putting my names on any of the games, so you won't find them on Hunchback. I think it wasn't until late Super Test or something you'll actually or Mr. Wimpy even you'll start to see my name appearing on the titles.
Yeah. Well, I've got here some of the ones that stood out for me were Short Circuit, the Spectrum port of Whizball, and Grisor or Contra to our American friends. You worked on all of these?
Yeah, mine. Whizball was the one Mark reminded me of. I didn't do a great deal of that. It had already been written, but most of it I just patched it together and fixed it.
There were a huge number of titles coming out of Ocean. Were there any games coming out of the stable that you admired from afar but didn't get to work on that you can remember?
Not till later. So Adam's Family Values, some of the NES titles, when Gary Bracey really took over running the show in terms of development. Adam's Family Values I would have liked to have perhaps been slightly more involved with. But whether that's because the game was good at the end or would I made it worse, I don't know. But it was a game I liked. I didn't have a huge amount of involvement. I did. I kind of got involved with Lemmings on the Game Boy, and but it was just really to help sort out some of the early technical difficulties of displaying so many moving lemmings on a system that only had 20 sprites or so.
Good. Well, Ocean managed to secure its first movie licenses in 1985 with Rambo, Short Circuit, and RoboCop. And in 1986, it would then sign a deal with Taito and Data East to port their arcade games like Renegade, Operation Wolf, and New Zealand Story. Did you welcome these deals as a game developer, or did you feel it stifled your ability to create original games?
So my personal view is I didn't really care.
Right.
Okay. I enjoyed actually writing the games, solving the technical problems within the games, and I didn't care that it was famous, not famous. I mean, Knight Rider was the one where we didn't like, because Knight Rider had been licensed, and then somebody tried to write it because I wasn't available, and then somebody else tried to write it, and then John came to me and said, "You've got 2 weeks to write Knight Rider." And I really didn't want to do that in 2 weeks. So I just threw something together, and I think Street Hawk as well was it Knight Rider Street Hawk? Sorry.
Street Hawk, okay.
Yeah, memories going Street Hawk. Just threw the game together, and it's horrendous. I'm not proud of it.
Yeah.
So I didn't care about it. Was a good thing was you get to go to see the movie before anybody else in the country. We'd have our own special showings, and half of Ocean would go to it. That was good. And you were kind of constrained a little bit by the movie. It had to have some relativity. I know I struggled with Short Circuit, which is one of my favourite games that I've written. I ended up switching to a kind of adventure game. David didn't like that, so I had to write another kind of pseudo-action game and put it on the other side of the tape. But so you're restricted in some respects to the things you could do on the Spectrum and relating to the game itself. So the difficult part was trying to match what you could do within the time period to some relevance to the movie.
Yeah.
And Never Ending Story was a difficult one when we were looking at the design for that, because, what do you do? I mean,
that ended up a text adventure, didn't it? Never Ending Story. Yes, yeah, I remember that one. And I guess if you're talking movie licenses as opposed to arcade licenses, you are given a lot more freedom to work within the realms of the movie.
It's different because I was working for Ocean. You had a product to deliver, and if it had a title, it had a tie-in, then you delivered it to that title. So if it was a film title, you had to do something around that. If you were working at home on your own in your bedroom, starting your first game, you spent the time doing gameplay, dealing with technical things like glitches and sounds, and so you had perhaps more freedom. and it would have been nice to have more freedom or longer time to produce the games so that we could put more. We were very proud of the technical content that we could do. It was throughout the period of the games were being produced for the Spectrum, we were getting better and better at producing things about sound, etc., and things like that. But, and scrolling, big argument about who invented push scrolling, but let's not go there. So. It would have been nice to have longer, but we didn't. We had a film release. We had a film release date. The game should come out with it, so you were restricted somewhat.
Yeah, even going back to Daley Thompson with his Olympics appearance, it was very tied to the time that it had to come out.
It was, yeah.
Well, with success came the inevitable piracy, and I understand you were involved in trying to tackle piracy at Ocean. What was your part in that?
There's a few things. There's a documentary that BBC Two did, and David went off to the market, the local markets, and picked up quite a few Spectrum and brought them back. And he said that are these real? And the answer was obviously no for some of them, but not obvious for others. And we realised that actually this is probably going on all over the country, and we could only guess at how many of the real ones versus the pirated ones being sold, but we viewed it as being probably a significant figure. And we knew about bedroom copying, everybody did it. But this wasn't. This was kind of a commercial. We're going to pinch your game as soon as it comes out, and we're going to sell it into everybody but the major chains, the WH Smiths and that. So it was significant. And we had a few ideas. One thing, for the disk-based stuff later on, by the way, we had an idea that was taken off us by the MOD because it was secret and we couldn't use it. But we involved some people who've been looking at tape protection systems, and then I produced my own as well. And the idea was to kind of make it difficult without the right audio equipment to make duplicates. And one thing we found working with the engineers at Ablex was that actually some of the cheaper cassette decks that we had in those days, not the hi-fi ones, were actually better for copying. So we could, if you made your waveform a certain way, and when I say waveform, so when the loader happens, it produces a wave sound that's coming out of the spectrum is square. It goes down and has a frequency of, I don't know, 2 kilohertz or something like that. But when you put it on tape, because of the electronics involved, the corners get rounded and the square parts. And the better the hi-fi, in some cases, the more rounded that became. So we had to work out certain sets of frequencies that would work well on the duplication system in Ablex, but not necessarily well in the hi-fi. They also had to change the duplication machines in Ablex as well, and the masters were slightly different. We took some time working on that. So we did that with other protection systems and then later with mine. And then what happened was that people started to hack the actual protection system itself. So we came up with more and more ingenious ways of actually protecting that code. And I've got a few tricks up my sleeve that I've used subsequently on the PC. And still, I'm not seeing somebody disassemble my protection system and explain how it works. They've cracked it, but they've cracked it in theory in an audio way rather than cracking the code.
Right. So a fairly successful system or series of systems that you've come up with then, as opposed to, say, I've got Robocop 3 here with its dongle, which is a famous one that was very quickly correct.
Yeah, get hacked anyway in the end.
Yeah. But,
you find another way around it,
Yeah. And just personally, what was your personal view on piracy? Was it straight up it's theft, or did you have a slightly softer view on it?
I think certainly for commercial it's theft. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For the guy at home, and most of the young kids, if you couldn't afford to buy the game and you copied it, I didn't approve, but I wouldn't go calling the police on him. Mm-hmm. But if you started selling tens of them in schoolyards, then that's a different matter. Yeah. It's, not for profit, absolutely not. And really not at all, because you stifle the growth of the industry. Not so much then, but now things like it's difficult to get the revenue back on movies and things like that. And they spend a lot of money on it. Yeah. I don't agree with it at all. Really. Okay. We were founder members of is it FACT, Federation Against Copyright Theft?
Was it FAST or FACT? FACT.
Yeah.
Okay.
FACT, yeah. One of the founder members. Okay. I vaguely remember attending a couple of meetings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So your career in the book here becomes a little hazy as we leave the 80s into the 90s. I think you state in the book that you don't remember a great deal and you got quite burnt out in the 90s.
As a developer, yeah.
Yeah. So was Ocean that relentless on its staff? Was burnout a common problem?
I don't think it was Ocean. I think it was me.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, there was constant deadlines and very little time between games. And I also supported that in a way because of my work ethic at the time. So yeah, I was burnt out. I was tired, and but I moved more towards helping the other guys in the Spectrum. We had a little office across the way. We expanded outside of the church, so I took on running the offices across the road, and then we eventually moved to Castleton, and I ended up looking after the mastering and production of all the Nintendo stuff as well. So occasionally getting involved with the testing and some of the design, but very little.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what are you where are you in life now, Paul? Are you still working? What?
Yeah. And still predominantly with software. I won't say who we work for, but we look after, our company has a customer that's in the railways. So we're looking after the software required to get all the systems in the railways talking to one another, trying to eliminate delay and things. I don't write software anymore. I have teams of people who do that. But I enjoy it. I still have technical design challenges, and I still relish them. I'd rather not be a manager. I'd rather still be a techie. So I suppose most of my day is a what we call solution architect. I'm an enterprise architect as well. So. Yeah, no, it's good.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear you're still in the industry in some way. Yeah. That's really good. So, Paul, the Ocean story is a big one, which I hope to explore further in the future. Loads and loads of people worked there, but I've really enjoyed hearing your particular recollections. So thank you for sharing your memories today, Paul.
You're welcome.
And if you'd like to read a whole lot more about the story, head on over to Fusion Retro Books. There's the Ocean Story book available in paperback and hardback. So go and take a look at that. I recommend it. And Paul's got a chapter in there as well. It's a great book. There we go. Thank you again, Paul. Take care.
Cheers. Bye now.